Now, for more, we have with us Professor Kim Hyun-wook from the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. Thank you for coming in today.
Thank you.
Now, so following the court ruling in late October, Japan has been ramping up its criticism against the South Korean government. Now, Seoul says that it will draw up follow-up measures through a body comprised of government officials and outside experts. Now, we will have to see if those follow-up measures do ease the tensions, but for now, where do you see this diplomatic row heading?
Yes, I think the response by Japanese government is something that we have expected. This issue, forced labor issue, which has been finally, sentenced at the Supreme Court, is a very sensitive issue for Japan. But I mean, the response itself is something I think more serious than we expected. There was, a statement by Kono Daro, the foreign minister of Japan, and he expressed that this judicial ruling is violence, and the judiciary ruling, by judiciary ruling of South Korea, the bilateral relationship between Japan and South Korea is now damaged. So some of the measures that the government of Japan is doing is trying to make a more serious diplomatic maneuvers throughout the world, sending messages to the embassies, and I think Japanese ambassadors, would try to, write some columns in the, papers, for example, in France or England, so and so forth. So I think this is a very serious issue, and I think there needs some adamant and wise response by South Korean government.
So the Korean government has said that Japan can express dissatisfaction about South Korean judiciary ruling, but it says that it shouldn't be turning it into a diplomatic dispute. Now, how big of an impact do these judiciary rulings have on the diplomatic relations between the countries?
I mean, yes, it is usually, accepted and as very sensitive, magnitude. Usually the governments of relevant governments usually accept it seriously. But the formal response has not been this big, usually, historically. So, as Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeon, mentioned in his statement that this issue is something that South Korean government and other external, experts would discuss further, and finally, the governmental opinion will be announced later on, and afterwards, that will be some kind of beginning line that the Japanese and South Korean government has to talk about these issues. So far, the Japanese government's response has been very preemptive. Has some intentions, I think. Maybe try to, with preemptive response, Japan, I think, wants to kind of induce the way South Korean government will respond in the future into the direction that Japan wants to be. Maybe some other factors would be related to the current Japanese government being isolated diplomatically in Northeast Asia. It doesn't have a very good relationship with the United States, President Trump, and also North Detente is kind of isolating Japanese diplomatically. So recent diplomatic behavior of Japan is that Japan and China, they have summit meeting, and I think trying to use these issues as an important momentum that it can overcome the current diplomatic isolation, I think.
Now, on that note, South Korean President Moon Jae-in is scheduled to visit Singapore and Papua New Guinea next week to attend ASEAN and APEC meetings. Now, usually it would have been conventional for him to sit down with his Japanese counterpart Shinzo Abe for talks, but nothing's been arranged. How big of an impact do you think this recent ruling has had on this decision?
I think this kind of aggressive posture of Japan would continue until there comes a South Korean government's position. As Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeon mentioned, I think the South Korean government's position would not be that aggressive as the judicial ruling from the Japanese perspective, trying to mitigate some of the magnitude, and I think South Korean government was try to manage these issues so they would not damage the bilateral relationship with Japan. So we'll see how it goes. But so far, we have to think about how we can, kind of soothe the Japanese, responses, which is too harsh at this juncture.
So you said earlier that Japan could be trying to set the direction of where to take these dealing with the matter in the future. But there have been reports that Japan may take the issue to the International Court of Justice and is also considering filing a complaint with the WTO over the government subsidies for Korean shipbuilders. Now, some say this is actually in retaliation. How far do you see Japan taking the issue for the meantime?
I don't think there is high possibility. I mean, Gonodaro, foreign minister, said that Japan is ready for next step measures, and they're ready to see what South Korean government's position would be, and also trying to pressure South Korea so that the government position of South Korea would not be that harsh. Kind of trying to kind of mitigate some of the issues that is, stimulating Japanese government. So far, it seems like these are some of the possible, policy options Japan has. For example, ICJ filing and also WTO issues. But from the current, position of Japan, if Japan does all these measures, the diplomatic isolation of Japan would be further, expedited. I don't think Japan would really seriously want these measures, want a more softened response by South Korean government. That's what I think Japan wants from South Korea.
So Seoul and Tokyo have a track record of sour relations over historic issues, like including the sexual enslavement issue. Now, the South Korean government has been pursuing a two-track strategy separating the historical issues from security and economic issues in order to develop future-oriented ties. How do you think the Korean government should be dealing with the issue this time around as to what measures should it draw up when it does give its response?
I think South Korea also has to take a two-track diplomacy in domestic issues. I mean, two-track, what I mean is that, South Korea-Japan relationship has to be more diplomatic. It should be dealing with Japan so that it would not damage the relationship with Japan. But domestically, have to take a little bit different posture. I mean, South Korean government has to take care of all the people of South Korea, which have been victims of forced labors and also, victims of, slavery and all that kind of issues. So, looking at Japan and looking at domestic people of South Korea, I think they have to be different. That should be the postures of South Korean government.
So South Korea is in a sticky position. Moving to the North Korea issues, now there's been a lot of speculation as to why the high-level talks between Washington and Pyongyang were postponed. CNN reported that North Korea was very angry that the U.S. wasn't taking any measures towards relieving sanctions. Now, this is quite different from recent remarks by U.S. President Donald Trump, who said that changes came because of other trips and he was very happy with what was going on with North. How should we be interpreting this situation?
I think the sanction issue is the reason that North Korea rejected the meeting with Secretary Pompeo, I think. Of course, the schedule changed by President Trump was something that happened, but I think that would not happen before the North Korean decision not to come to New York for a talk with Secretary Pompeo. The thorny issue between two countries is that, the U.S. still wants a final and serious verification inspectors going to North Korea. At least that should be the one that the U.S. wants as a first step measures for denuclearization. As far as the Yongbyon facility is concerned, of course, the U.S. wants some other things too. For example, North Korea has to, provide a declaration of nuclear capabilities of North Korea. But sanctions, the U.S. definitely does not want sanctions to be lifted at this time with no progress of denuclearization. So those two issues, it's not easy to coordinate the different issues, different positions of two countries. I don't know what will be the future, but I mean, it doesn't seem such an easy issue. I don't think they would come up with an agreement easily.
In the meantime, North Korea state media lashed out at the recent decision by Seoul and Washington to launch a working group on Pyongyang's denuclearization and also to resume a joint marine drill. Now, do you see any message that the North is trying to relay through this?
These two issues are very important. First, the joint marine drill. That is something that North Korea has been arguing about the U.S. anti-North Korea policies. So there should be a stop of joint military exercises. But I think from the South Korea and the U.S. perspective, they need these kinds of drills now and even next year for the preparation of wartime outcome to be transferred back to South Korea. Kind of a testing case for the South Korean military capabilities. But I think that's something that North Korea has been arguing as an anti-North Korea policies. And also the working group, this is something the U.S. provided, suggested, and the two countries come up and establish, which means that they will come and make a working group in which two countries will monitor closely if there will be any measures of the U.S. and South Korea that would violate the sanctions, the UN sanctions. So this would be such a big obstacle for North Korean endeavors to break the sanctions that is going on. North Korea always wanted to make a lot of holds of sanctions with South Korea, with China, and with other countries. But working group level, which means that the monitoring and controlling of the sanctions will be bolstered, I think this would be not happy for North Korea.
Now, there's been concerns that the delayed high-level talks between the two could hinder the developments on joint projects regarding the two Koreas. Now, there was a meeting today between the heads of the Joint Liaison Office earlier Friday. The first encounter since the talks were since they were postponed. Do you think the matter was brought up in any way?
Yeah, the Pyongyang joint declaration, joint agreement between North-South summit meeting, they have agreed upon many things about the economic cooperations, but the content itself was pretty much restricted by the sanctions themselves. So I think in this meeting, I think the two countries can only talk about non-economic issues. Because sanctions should be lifted if they want to talk about more serious economic cooperations. The agenda, I think, will be pretty much limited.
I'm afraid that's where we'll have to wrap things up today. Thank you for your insights.
Thank you.